It is one of the great paradoxes of the modern world. In the middle of one of the driest deserts in North America, a glittering city of more than 2 million people has risen, a place of fountains and pools and dancing waters, a monument to human ambition built where almost no rain falls from the sky. That city is Las Vegas, and its very existence depends on a single source of water, a great reservoir on the Colorado River called Lake Mead. And here is the unsettling part. That reservoir has been shrinking, its level falling year after year through a long drought until it reached lows not seen since it was first filled. A city of millions, in the desert, leaning almost entirely on a lake that keeps getting smaller. It raises an obvious and pressing question, one that hangs over the future of the entire region. How long can this continue? How long can Las Vegas go on depending on a shrinking lake, and what happens if that lake keeps falling? This is the story of that dependence, of the remarkable steps the city has taken to protect itself, and of the honest answer to the question of how long the situation can last. It turns out to be far more surprising and more hopeful than you might expect. Quick honest word before we dive in. A lot of people watch these all the way through, love them, and forget the one small thing that keeps a channel like ours going: hitting subscribe. If you are finding this interesting, take 1 second and subscribe right now. It genuinely matters for us and costs you nothing. And drop your state or country in the comments so we can see who is watching. Alright, let's begin. A city leaning on a single lake. To understand the stakes, you first have to understand just how completely Las Vegas depends on Lake Mead. Because the degree of that dependence is what makes the shrinking of the lake so serious for the city. Unlike some cities that draw their water from a variety of sources, spreading their risk across rivers, reservoirs, groundwater, and imported supplies, Las Vegas draws the overwhelming majority of its water from a single place, the Colorado River, stored in Lake Mead just outside the city. This one reservoir supplies the great bulk of the water that flows to the homes, businesses, resorts, and people of the Las Vegas Valley, making the city almost entirely reliant on this one source. This concentration of dependence is a profound vulnerability because it means that the fate of the city is tied, to an extraordinary degree, to the fate of one lake. When a city has many sources of water, the decline of any one of them can be cushioned by the others. But when a city leans on a single source, the health of that source becomes a matter of existential importance. For Las Vegas, Lake Mead is not one supply among many, but very nearly the whole of its water. And so the falling of the lake is not a distant worry, but a direct threat to the city's lifeline. This is the essential situation that frames everything else: a large and growing desert city, dependent almost entirely on a single reservoir, watching that reservoir shrink. It is a situation that would seem to spell trouble, and yet the story of how Las Vegas has responded to it is one of the most remarkable in the whole saga of water in the American West. There is an added dimension to this dependence that makes it even more striking, which is how small Nevada's overall share of the Colorado River actually is compared to the other states and users that draw from it. Of all the water that the river provides to the region, Nevada receives one of the smallest allocations, a modest slice compared to the far larger shares that go to agriculture and to the bigger states of the basin. This means that Las Vegas has built a great desert metropolis on a remarkably thin ration of water, squeezing an entire city out of a supply that is small by the standards of the river as a whole. That fact cuts two ways. It underscores how little margin the city has, but it also means that Las Vegas has had to become extraordinarily efficient simply to exist, developing habits of conservation out of necessity that more water-rich places have never been forced to learn. The danger of depending on one source. Before turning to how the city has responded, it is worth dwelling on why a single source dependence is so dangerous, because understanding the vulnerability makes the response all the more impressive. A city that relies on one reservoir is exposed to every threat that reservoir faces. If the lake falls too low to be drawn from at the city's intakes, the water supply is jeopardized. If the lake falls to the point where the dam can no longer pass water downstream, the consequences would be dire. And because the reservoir is fed by a river that is itself in decline, the threats to the lake are not temporary flukes, but part of a sustained trend, driven by drought, a warming climate, and long-standing overuse of the river. A single-source city has no easy fallback if its one source fails, no other river to turn to, no large reserve to tap while it sorts things out. This is the vulnerability that has hung over Las Vegas as Lake Mead has fallen, and it is a vulnerability that the city's leaders and water managers have understood acutely. They have known that the city's future depends on the reservoir, and that the reservoir's decline could, if left unaddressed, threaten the very ability of the city to draw the water it needs. This awareness has driven an unusually determined and forward-looking response, because when a city understands that its single lifeline is at risk, it has every incentive to do whatever it can to protect that lifeline and to reduce its exposure. The danger of depending on one shrinking source has been, in a sense, the spur that has driven Las Vegas to become one of the most water-conscious cities in the country, transforming a profound vulnerability into a powerful motivation for action. The straw that reaches the bottom, one of the most dramatic steps Las Vegas has taken to protect its water supply, addresses the most immediate physical danger of the shrinking lake, the possibility that the water could fall below the intakes through which the city draws it. To draw water from Lake Mead, the city uses intakes positioned at certain depths in the reservoir, and as the lake fell, there was a genuine risk that the surface could drop below the higher intakes, leaving them high and dry and cutting off the flow. Faced with this threat, the city undertook an enormous engineering project to build a new intake positioned much deeper in the lake, low enough to keep drawing water even if the reservoir fell to very low levels. Sometimes described as a straw that reaches near the very bottom of the lake. Alongside this deep intake, the city built a powerful new pumping station designed to lift the water up from those low levels and keep it flowing to the valley even as the lake continued to drop. Together, these projects represent an insurance policy against the decline of the reservoir, a way of ensuring that Las Vegas could continue to draw its water even in scenarios where the lake fell far lower than it ever had before. The very fact that such projects were deemed necessary is a striking testament to how seriously the city has taken the threat, an acknowledgement that the lake could fall to levels that would have stranded the old intakes. These engineering feats have given the city a crucial measure of security, extending the range of lake levels at which it can still function, and they are a central part of the answer to the question of how long the situation can continue, because they push back the point at which the falling lake would physically cut off the city's supply. Here is something I would genuinely love to know, and it takes 10 seconds. Does it surprise you that a city built for fun and fountains has become one of the most water-savvy places in the country? Drop a yes or no in the comments, because your reactions help us shape what we cover next, and I read every reply. Okay, back to it. The city that learned to save. Here is where the story takes its most surprising and encouraging turn, because Las Vegas has responded to the shrinking of its lifeline not only with engineering, but with an extraordinary commitment to conservation, becoming a genuine leader in the careful use of water. Over the years, even as its population has grown substantially, the city has managed to reduce the total amount of water it draws from the Colorado River, an achievement that runs counter to what one might expect and that reflects a determined, sustained effort to wring efficiency out of every drop. The city has, in effect, learned to support more people with less water, a feat that offers a powerful example of what conservation can accomplish. A cornerstone of this achievement is the way Las Vegas handles the water used indoors, because the city recycles a very large share of the water that goes down its drains. Water used inside homes and businesses, in sinks, showers, and the like, is collected, treated, and returned to Lake Mead, and this returned water earns the city credits that allow it to draw a corresponding additional amount from the lake. The practical effect is that indoor water use in Las Vegas is largely recycled rather than consumed, so that the water used inside is, in a sense, borrowed and returned rather than lost. This system of extensive reuse is one of the reasons the city has been able to grow while keeping its overall consumption in check, and it is a model of the kind of efficiency that a water-scarce future demands. The city that many imagine as a symbol of excess has quietly become a symbol of something quite different: the intelligent. Disciplined stewardship of a precious resource. The war on grass. If indoor water is largely recycled, the real target of Las Vegas's conservation efforts has been the water used outdoors, because outdoor water, used on landscaping and lawns, is the water that is truly consumed, lost to evaporation and to the thirst of plants, never to return to the lake. Recognizing this, the city has waged what amounts to a determined campaign against decorative grass, encouraging, and in some cases, requiring the removal of the thirsty lawns that consume so much water in the desert, and replacing them with desert-adapted landscaping that needs far less. Programs that pay residents to tear out their grass, restrictions on new decorative lawns, and rules limiting the watering of landscaping have all been part of this effort, and the results have been substantial, as vast areas of thirsty turf have been converted to landscaping suited to the desert. This focus on outdoor water reflects a clear and clever understanding of where the water actually goes and where the savings can be found. Because indoor water is largely recycled and returned, reducing it saves relatively little, but because outdoor water is consumed and lost, reducing it saves a great deal, and so the city has concentrated its efforts precisely where they yield the greatest benefit. The war on grass has transformed the landscape of the city, replacing green lawns with desert plantings and gravel. And while this has changed the look of neighborhoods, it has dramatically reduced the amount of water lost to the desert air. It is a striking example of targeting conservation where it matters most, and it has been central to the city's ability to reduce its overall water use. The transformation of the city's landscape is a visible sign of its adaptation to a drier future. A reimagining of what a desert city should look like that other places facing water scarcity are increasingly looking to as a model. The logic behind the war on grass is worth emphasizing because it is so often misunderstood. A patch of decorative lawn in the desert, the kind that lines a street median or decorates a business park where no one ever walks or plays, can consume a startling amount of water over the course of a hot year. Water that simply evaporates into the dry air and is gone forever. Removing that grass and replacing it with desert plants and stone eliminates that loss entirely. And because there are so many such patches across a sprawling city, the savings add up to an enormous quantity of water. The city recognized that this ornamental, non-functional grass was among the single largest sources of pure water loss in the valley, and that targeting it would yield savings far greater than almost any other measure. It is conservation guided by arithmetic, a focus on the places where the water truly disappears. Quick pause, because this matters and deserves to be seen. If you are getting value from this, tap the like button. It really does help the video reach more people. And if you have family or friends in the Southwest, or anyone who cares about how cities can survive with less water, share this with them, because this is genuinely important and hopeful to understand. One like, one share to someone you care about, and let's keep going. Why the Strip uses less than you think, a common assumption, is that the glittering resorts of the Las Vegas Strip, with their fountains, pools, and lavish displays, must be enormous wasters of water, but the reality is more nuanced and reveals something important about how the city manages its supply. The famous water features of the Strip, the dancing fountains and the elaborate displays, capture the imagination and seem the very picture of extravagance in a desert. Yet they account for a surprisingly small share of the city's total water use, and much of the water in them is recycled and reused rather than simply consumed. The resorts, which have a strong incentive to manage their costs and to present themselves responsibly, have adopted various measures to use water efficiently, and the spectacle of the Strip, for all its apparent excess, is not the main driver of the city's water consumption. The bulk of the water in Las Vegas, as in most cities, goes not to the famous attractions, but to the everyday needs of the population, and, above all, to outdoor landscaping across the residential valley. This is why the city's conservation efforts have focused on grass and outdoor water rather than on the visible spectacle of the Strip, because that is where the real consumption lies. Understanding this helps to correct a common misconception and to appreciate the sophistication of the city's approach, which targets the actual sources of water loss rather than the most visible symbols of apparent waste. The Strip, in this sense, is something of a distraction from the real story of the city's water, which is a story less of fountains than of lawns, less of spectacle than of the quiet, everyday choices that together determine how much water a desert city consumes. The city has understood this, and its response has been shaped by a clear-eyed grasp of where its water truly goes. So how long can this continue? We come, at last, to the central question: how long can Las Vegas continue to depend on a shrinking lake? The honest answer is that the situation is more sustainable than the alarming premise might suggest, precisely because of the extraordinary steps the city has taken, but that it is not without real limits and real risks. Through its deep intake and pumping station, the city has secured its physical ability to draw water from the lake even at very low levels, pushing back the point at which the falling reservoir would cut off its supply. Through its aggressive conservation, its recycling of indoor water, and its war on outdoor grass, the city has reduced its demand to a remarkable degree, easing the pressure it places on the lake and buying itself room to continue even as the reservoir shrinks. These measures mean that Las Vegas is far better positioned than many would assume to weather the decline of Lake Mead. Yet the situation is not without its limits, because the city's fate remains tied to the health of the Colorado River system as a whole, and that system faces serious long-term challenges. If the river continues to decline, if the reservoir falls to the most extreme levels, and if the broader system of agreements that governs the river's water fails to adapt, even a city as water-savvy as Las Vegas could face genuine hardship. The city's own conservation, impressive as it is, cannot by itself solve the larger crisis of a shrinking river, which depends on the cooperation of many states and users and on the broader trajectory of the climate. So the answer to how long this can continue is, in essence, that Las Vegas has bought itself considerable time and security through its own efforts, that it is far more resilient than its dependence on a single shrinking lake might suggest, but that its long-term future still depends on the fate of the wider river system and on the collective ability of the region to bring its use of the Colorado into balance with what the river can provide. The city has done remarkable work to protect itself, and that work may well be enough to see it through, but the ultimate question is bound up with the future of the whole Southwest. All right, I know, second time I am bringing this up, feel free to sigh at me. But quickly, if you have made it this deep into a video about Las Vegas and its water, you clearly find this stuff fascinating. And a lot of you who watch have not subscribed yet. That one tap genuinely tips the scales for a small channel like ours. No guilt, just a grateful ask. That is the last time. Promise. Let's finish. The lesson of a desert city, when we step back and consider the whole story of Las Vegas and its shrinking lake, we find that it is not, in the end, a simple tale of impending doom, but something more complex and more instructive. A lesson in how a city can confront a profound vulnerability and respond with ingenuity and discipline. Here is a city that depends almost entirely on a single shrinking source, a situation that seems to invite disaster, and yet through determined engineering and remarkable conservation, it has made itself far more resilient than that situation would suggest, securing its ability to draw water even from a much lower lake and reducing its demand even as it has grown. The story of Las Vegas is, in this light, a story of adaptation, of a city taking the threat to its lifeline seriously and doing the hard work of protecting itself. This lesson matters far beyond Las Vegas, because the challenge the city faces of living within the limits of a diminishing water supply is one that more and more places around the world will confront as the climate warms and water grows scarcer. The strategies that Las Vegas has pioneered, the recycling of indoor water, the targeting of outdoor consumption, the removal of thirsty lawns, the securing of the water supply against a falling source, offer a model of what can be done, a demonstration that even a desert city dependent on a shrinking lake can dramatically reduce its footprint and extend its future. The city's experience shows that dependence on a threatened source is not necessarily a sentence of doom, that human ingenuity and collective discipline can make a real difference, and that the wise use of water can allow a community to thrive even in the face of scarcity. How long can Las Vegas continue to depend on a shrinking lake? Longer than one might fear, thanks to its own efforts, though ultimately only as long as the wider region succeeds in bringing the great river back into balance. The story is a warning, but it is also, encouragingly, a story of what determined action can achieve, and in that,